The day I tore up my neighbor's brand new driveway, half the county showed up to watch. Some folks brought lawn chairs. Some leaned against their trucks with coffee cups in their hands. One guy actually started taking bets on how long it would take before deputies got called. The funny thing is, nobody was there because they thought I was the bad guy. They were there because for almost 3 months they'd watched this whole mess unfold, and by then everybody knew exactly whose fault it was. What they didn't know was how a buried water line, one arrogant developer, and a few inches of concrete would end up costing somebody close to $80,000. My name is Wade Harper, and for most of my life I've lived outside a little ranching community near Red Creek, Colorado. I own 22 acres of horse property that my father bought back when land was still affordable and people settled arguments with handshakes more often than lawyers. It's not some giant operation. Just enough pasture for horses, a few barns, some boarding clients, and a house that has survived more snowstorms than I can count. For years my life was pretty predictable. Feed horses in the morning, fix whatever broke that day, complain about hay prices, repeat. Honestly, I liked it that way. The one thing that kept the whole place running was water. Back in 1999, after a particularly dry summer, I invested a lot of money into upgrading the ranch water system. Part of that project involved burying a private water line that connected my well system to county infrastructure. The line crossed a narrow strip of neighboring land for roughly 200 feet. Nothing unusual about that. The previous owner and my dad had worked everything out years before. There was a properly recorded utility easement attached to both properties. Lawyers signed off on it. Surveyors mapped it. County records reflected it. Everything was legal and documented. For more than 20 years, nobody complained. Every spring, I'd walk the route, inspect markers, and make sure everything remained accessible in case repairs were ever needed. Most years, it took maybe 20 minutes. Then along came Owen Mercer. The first thing people noticed about Owen was that he never seemed to arrive anywhere quietly. He drove expensive vehicles, wore designer boots that had probably never touched mud, and talked about real estate deals the way normal people talk about weather. He'd made a fortune building luxury properties around Seattle and decided our area was the next hidden market. At least that's what he told everyone. He bought 15 acres bordering my ranch and immediately started talking about building an elite equestrian estate that would attract wealthy buyers from out of state. The locals smiled politely. Around here we've learned that people who spend a lot of time talking about themselves usually end up teaching everyone else a lesson instead. The first real interaction I had with him happened one April morning. I was walking the easement route carrying a bundle of orange survey flags. The grass was just starting to turn green after winter, and I was marking access points like I always did. Suddenly, I heard an engine behind me. A black Range Rover rolled across the field and stopped about 10 feet away. The window dropped. Owen sat there wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my saddle. "Can I help you?" he asked. Now, the words sounded polite enough, but the tone wasn't. I explained who I was and what I was doing. "Just marking my utility easement," I said. "Water line runs through here." He looked at the flags, then back at me. "This is my property." I nodded. "Part of it is. The easement's recorded. Has been for decades." He smirked. Not laughed. Smirked. The kind of expression people make when they've already decided they're smarter than everyone around them. "I reviewed every document before I bought this place," he said. "Didn't see anything about you crossing my land." "You might want to check again," I replied. "Title company should have it." He rested one arm on the window and shook his head. "Well, I own it now. Whatever arrangement existed before isn't really my concern." That sentence stuck with me. Not because it was correct. It wasn't. But because it told me exactly who I was dealing with. Some people move into a community and try to learn how things work. Others arrive assuming money automatically rewrites every rule. Before driving away, he pointed toward my flags and said, "I'd move those if I were you." Then he hit the gas and disappeared in a cloud of dust. Standing there alone, I remember thinking maybe we'd gotten off on the wrong foot. Maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe once construction started we'd find some common ground. Looking back now, that's probably the last optimistic thought I had about Owen Mercer, because 3 weeks later one of my boarders called and said the water pressure at the barn had suddenly dropped. And at the time, I had no idea that phone call was about to start the biggest property fight of my entire life. I figured it was probably a pump issue at first. Anyone who owns a ranch long enough learns that when something stops working, The simplest explanation is usually the right one. So I spent that morning checking everything on my side of the property. I inspected the well house, tested the pressure tanks, checked every valve, and even called a friend who had helped install part of the system years earlier. Everything looked normal. The pump was running correctly. The gauges were reading fine. Yet somehow the pressure feeding the barns kept dropping. By lunchtime, I had a knot in my stomach. Water problems aren't like a broken fence or a dead tractor battery. Water problems get serious fast when animals depend on it. I loaded my utility vehicle and drove toward the easement route. The moment I reached the property line, I stopped cold. Where there had been open pasture 3 weeks earlier, there was now a massive concrete driveway stretching nearly 400 feet from Owen's front gate all the way to the construction site of his future mansion. Fresh concrete, perfectly finished, expensive, and sitting directly on top of my water line. I just sat there staring for a few seconds, honestly trying to convince myself I was mistaken. Surely nobody would spend that kind of money without checking surveys and utility records. Surely no contractor would pour concrete over a recorded easement. Surely somebody had asked questions first. Then I spotted one of my old survey markers sticking out near the edge of the pavement, bent sideways and half buried. That was when my stomach sank. I called Owen immediately. He answered on the second ring. "What's up, Wade?" he said. The casual tone irritated me instantly. "You paved over my water line." Silence. Then, "Oh, that." I looked at the driveway again. "What do you mean, oh, that?" He sighed like I was inconveniencing him. "One of the contractors mentioned some old utility pipe. They said it wasn't active." "It's active every single day," I said. "That line supplies my ranch." "Well, your water still works, doesn't it?" he replied. "Barely. And now I can't access it for repairs." I could practically hear him shrugging through the phone. "Sounds like a you problem." I remember gripping the phone so hard my hand hurt. "No, Owen. It's an easement problem. A legal one." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Then call your lawyer." Then he hung up. Over the next week, things got worse. Pressure continued falling. Some mornings the troughs filled normally. Other mornings they barely trickled. I started hauling emergency water tanks onto the property just to make sure the horses had enough to drink. Every day cost money. Fuel, equipment, labor, time. My boarders noticed. A couple started asking questions. One family moved their horses to another facility because they were worried about reliability. I couldn't blame them. If I were paying someone to care for my animals, I'd want dependable water too. By the end of the second week, I was spending nearly $400 a day managing a problem that shouldn't have existed. What bothered me most wasn't even the money. It was the arrogance. Owen hadn't made a mistake and apologized. He hadn't offered to fix anything. He had simply decided his project mattered more than someone else's rights. That's the kind of behavior that spreads if nobody challenges it. Eventually, I called a property attorney named Eleanor Briggs. Around western Colorado, Eleanor had a reputation. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. But judges listened when she spoke because she knew her material better than almost anyone. I carried a stack of records into her office and explained everything. She spent about 15 minutes reviewing surveys, deeds, easement maps, and county filings. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "He's in trouble." "That obvious?" I asked. "Worse than obvious." She tapped the easement document. "This isn't ambiguous. This is one of the cleanest utility easements I've seen in years. He says he owns the land now." She laughed. "A lot of people say things. Doesn't make them true." Then she pointed to another section of the paperwork. "If he obstructed access and caused damage, the court can order removal." The entire driveway. Potentially. I remember sitting there for a second letting that sink in. Even then I didn't want a war. I just wanted my water line protected. If Owen had called me that afternoon and said, "Let's work something out," we probably could have avoided everything that followed. But some people become trapped by their own pride. The more wrong they are, the harder they fight. Eleanor filed for emergency relief. Because livestock welfare was involved and access to water was being compromised, the court moved surprisingly fast. Meanwhile, the situation at the ranch kept deteriorating. One evening I was standing by the barn filling buckets from a temporary tank when one of my oldest boarders, a retired firefighter named Hank, walked over. Hank had boarded horses with me for almost 8 years. He watched me wrestle with a hose for a minute before speaking. "You gonna let that guy get away with this?" he asked. I looked out toward the neighboring property where construction crews were still working under floodlights. "No." Hank nodded. Good. Then he smiled. Because half the county already wants to see him lose. Word had spread. Small communities are like that. People pay attention, especially when newcomers start acting like local laws are optional. A few days before the hearing, an independent inspection confirmed what we'd feared. Pressure testing suggested the concrete load may have stressed portions of the line beneath the driveway. We couldn't fully assess the damage until access was restored, but evidence was mounting. By then, Owen had become increasingly vocal online. He posted long complaints about government interference, property rights, and bureaucrats preventing economic development. The irony would have been funny if the situation hadn't been costing me thousands of dollars. Finally, the hearing arrived. The courtroom wasn't packed, but there were enough spectators to fill most of the seats. Owen showed up in an expensive suit accompanied by 2 attorneys. Eleanor carried a single, organized binder. That should have been my first clue about how things were going to go. The judge was Margaret Holloway, a woman who happened to own a cattle ranch outside town. More importantly, she understood exactly how critical water access was in rural communities. Eleanor presented the easement, county records, photographs, surveys, inspection reports, and testimony regarding the declining water pressure. Everything was straightforward. No drama, just facts. Then Owen's attorneys argued that access could still be provided through future maintenance panels cut into the driveway. I watched Judge Holloway's expression change immediately. Not angry, just unimpressed. She looked directly at Owen and asked, "Did you review the easement before construction?" One attorney answered for him. The judge repeated the question. This time, Owen reluctantly admitted he had seen references to it during closing documents. The entire courtroom seemed to get quieter. Judge Holloway looked down at the paperwork, then back up. "So you knew it existed?" Nobody answered. A few minutes later, she delivered her ruling. The easement was valid. The obstruction was unlawful. Access had been compromised. The driveway had to be removed from the easement corridor within 21 days. If the defendant failed to comply, I would be authorized to remove the obstruction myself and recover associated costs, damages, legal expenses, and repair expenses. I glanced toward Owen. His face had gone completely red. Then came the moment I'll never forget. One of his attorneys again mentioned access panels as a compromise. Judge Holloway didn't even hesitate. "An easement grants access," she said, "not permission slips." The hearing ended shortly afterward. Outside the courthouse, reporters from a local newspaper approached both of us. I declined comment. Owen didn't. He spent nearly 10 minutes complaining about overregulation and unfair treatment. The article hit town the next morning. It didn't help him. 21 days came and went. The driveway remained exactly where it was. No demolition crews. No repairs. No communication. Nothing. On the morning of day 22, I woke up before sunrise, poured myself a cup of coffee, looked out across my ranch, and realized the next few hours were probably going to become local legend. The demolition crew arrived just after 7 in the morning. By then, the sheriff's office had already been notified. The county water inspector was on site, and Eleanor was standing beside her truck holding a copy of the court order thick enough to stop a bullet. I remember looking across the neighboring property and feeling strangely calm. For months I'd been angry, frustrated, exhausted, and worried about the future of my ranch. That morning, though, there wasn't much left to worry about. The court had ruled. The deadline had passed. Now we were simply following instructions. The first concrete saw started cutting a few minutes later. The sound echoed across the valley like a chain saw attacking a mountain. Huge sections of driveway were marked, scored, and prepared for removal. Before long, excavators began lifting entire slabs into waiting dump trucks. The driveway that had taken weeks to build started disappearing piece by piece. Around 8:30, Owen finally showed up. I heard his truck before I saw it. He slammed on the brakes, jumped out, and started shouting before his boots even hit the ground properly. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he yelled. One of the deputies immediately stepped between him and the equipment. I walked over carrying the court order. "You had 21 days, I said. "This didn't have to happen." He looked at the papers, then at the machinery tearing apart his driveway. For a moment I thought he might finally understand how badly he'd miscalculated. Instead, he pointed at me and said, "You're destroying my property." I handed him the order. "No, Owen. You did that 3 months ago." He didn't have much to say after that. The deputies kept him back while the work continued. 2 full days later, the entire easement corridor was exposed. That's when we finally saw the damage. 3 separate stress fractures had formed along the water line. None had completely failed yet, but they were heading that direction. According to the inspector, it wasn't a matter of if the line would eventually rupture. It was a matter of when. Had we waited another year, maybe less, I could have faced a complete loss of service. Standing there looking at those cracks, I remember feeling something unexpected. Relief. For months, people had treated the problem like a theoretical disagreement. There, buried beneath the concrete, was proof that the danger had been real all along. We replaced roughly 60 feet of damaged pipe, restored the easement, installed permanent markers, and documented everything. My water pressure returned almost immediately. Within days, the ranch was operating normally again. Horses had reliable water. Boarders stopped worrying. Life finally started feeling familiar. Owen, however, wasn't finished. A few weeks later, he filed a lawsuit claiming I had caused unnecessary damage to his property and seeking reimbursement for the driveway. When Eleanor called to tell me, I honestly laughed out loud. Not because lawsuits are funny, but because it felt like watching someone lose a poker hand and then demand new cards. The case didn't last long. The judge reviewed the previous ruling, examined the timeline, and dismissed his claims. Then came the part that really hurt him. The court ordered him to reimburse my legal fees, emergency water expenses, repair costs, inspection expenses, and income losses connected to boarders leaving the ranch. The final judgment came to just over $67,000. Most people would have stopped there. Owen didn't. He appealed. Another round of filings followed. More attorneys, more hearings, more money. The result was exactly the same. He lost again. This time, the appellate court added nearly $9,000 in additional costs. By the end of everything, the driveway was gone, the water line was repaired, and Owen had spent far more defending his mistake than fixing it would have cost in the first place. The luxury estate project stalled not long afterward. Construction slowed. Investors reportedly backed away. Eventually, the property sat partially completed for months. I won't pretend I celebrated that. Contrary to what some people think, I didn't want to ruin the guy. I just wanted him to respect a legal agreement that existed long before either of us were having this argument. The strange thing is, looking back now, the entire situation could have been avoided with a 10-minute conversation and a little humility. That's all it would have taken. One phone call, one survey review, one decision to treat a neighbor like a human being instead of an obstacle. But pride has a way of becoming expensive, especially when concrete gets poured on top of paperwork that doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. Even today, every time I ride along that section of fence line, I can still picture the excavators lifting those giant slabs into the air while half the county watched from the roadside. Some people call it revenge. Others call it justice. Personally, I think it was simply accountability finally catching up with somebody who believed money could replace common sense. But here's the question I've wondered about ever since. If you were in my position, would you have taken him to court the moment that driveway went in, or would you have tried even harder to work things out before things reached that point? Let me know down in the comments, because around here, folks still argue about that one. And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor who thought the rules applied to everyone except them, I'd love to hear your story too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, because sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened right next door.